Ever since Rose's comment about the rent, the vibe in the apartment got so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mason didn't say squat to Rosa, but the look he gave her was pure hatred. He hated being called out, hated having his irresponsible ass exposed. Rosa, though? Cool as a cucumber. She stayed focused on her studies, but I noticed she started being more careful. She never left money or personal stuff lying around. And more importantly, she started locking her bedroom door, even if she was just heading to the kitchen for water. It was a small thing, but it was a silent declaration of war. A refusal to put up with Mason's presence. Then, it was bound to happen. One night, Mason came home wasted. He wanted to get into Rosa's room to find something, I don't even know what. He started banging on her door. A bang! Echoed through the apartment, making me jump out of my skin. "Open up, you bitch!" he screamed, his voice thick with rage and booze. "Who the hell do you think you are locking your door? You loudmouth slut! You think you're so smart, huh?" He kept pounding on the door, cussing her out with the foulest words. I cowered on the sofa, my heart pounding like it was trying to bust out of my chest. Scared. I was scared of Mason. Scared of his sudden, violent outbursts. Scared he'd hurt Rosa, and me too. Mason's pounding and cursing echoed through the apartment, ripping through every wall, stabbing straight into my mind. I was still shaking, but it wasn't just plain fear anymore. It was the trembling of pure rage. I looked at Mason, raging like a wild animal. The guy who used to be my love was now just a violent, despicable jerk. I realized he wasn't just using me. He was a real danger. I couldn't let him keep existing in my life, or in anyone else's lash and leniency. I'd hesitated, I'd been weak, I'd tried to forgive. But in that moment, seeing the madness in his eyes, and hearing the filthy words spew out of him, I knew I couldn't wait another second. I had enough proof. I had enough motivation. My plan, the ruthless plan I'd been cooking up, was going down. Rosa didn't open her door. But Mason's life door? I was gonna bust it wide open for the whole world to see his true face. After the night Mason banged on Rosa's door, a chilling silence fell over the apartment. Mason became more withdrawn, sometimes giving me suspicious looks. He knew Rosa saw right through him, and he could feel the change in me too. I kept my poker face, still working at the laundromat, still trying to scrape by. But deep down, my plan was almost complete. I had gathered enough evidence, from his shopping receipts, the sneaky photos of him with other women, to the testimonies of old victims I'd managed to contact. I was just waiting for the right moment to deliver the final blow. Everything seemed to be settling down before the storm. One morning, as I was sipping coffee and checking emails, my phone buzzed. A text message, unknown number. I hesitated, but curiosity nudged me to open it. The words that popped up on the screen almost made me drop my coffee. "Watch out for your man. He's got a fiancé in Brooklyn Heights." I read the message over and over, each word like a knife piercing my heart. Fiancé. Brooklyn Heights. Not one, but two other women he was stringing along at the same time, not to mention the casual hookups I'd already seen. Sarah, and now some woman in Brooklyn Heights. This wasn't just a regular cheating situation anymore. This was a network of scams, an elaborate play, and I was just one of the puppets in his hands. I stared at the message, then glanced towards Mason's bedroom. He was still asleep, oblivious and shameless. A wave of disgust rose in me. All the promises, the apologies, the stories about art and dreams, all of it was fake. He was a professional con artist, a devil in human disguise. I wasn't sad or disappointed anymore. Just a cold fury and a painful clarity. That message wasn't a shock that knocked me down. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the ultimate confirmation of all my suspicions. It solidified my resolve, turning me into a weapon. I wasn't just going to expose Mason. I was going to destroy his reputation, his assets, and his entire life, at all costs. No turning back. He would have to pay for all the broken hearts, for all the lives he had ruined, and I would be the one to orchestrate it. After getting the message about Mason's fiancé in Brooklyn Heights, I thought I'd storm into his room, screaming and throwing everything around. But I didn't. I'd learned to control my emotions. I knew a pointless argument would just give him a thrill. I needed a cold, decisive confrontation. I waited for him to wake up, waited for him to sit at the table, pretending it was a normal morning. I put my phone on the table, opened the message, and looked him straight in the eye. Mason took a sip of coffee, then glanced at my phone. His face flickered for a second, but then quickly settled back into his usual calm, even slightly contemptuous expression. He let out a sneering laugh, a smirk I'd grown to utterly despise. "What's this nonsense, Emily? You believe this garbage?" He put the phone down, looking straight at me, his eyes glinting with defiance. "Do you believe them? These people who know nothing about me? Or do you believe me, who's been with you for 3 years?" He put his hand on mine, his face full of fake persuasion. "They're using you to turn against me, babe. Don't be so naive." His voice was still sweet, still charming, but I could clearly see the lies hidden beneath. I stayed silent. No argument, no tears. I didn't need to justify myself. I didn't need to believe him anymore. His eyes, that sneering laugh, and the question, "Do you believe them or do you believe me?" were the final confirmation of everything. He believed he had perfectly fooled me. He didn't know that his very shamelessness, that very contemptuous look, had lit the final fire within me. I slowly pulled my hand away from his. I stood up, without saying a word. I walked straight into the room, grabbed my laptop. He still sat there, sipping his coffee, believing he had won. He didn't know that my silence wasn't acceptance. It was the calm before the storm. I would show him who I believed. I would show him the truth he'd hidden, and I would turn him into an example, a lesson for all the other con artists in this New York City. He had smirked. Now it was my turn to laugh. Laugh as he fell apart. After that meaningless conversation with Mason, when he shamelessly denied everything, I knew I had nothing left to say to him. I kept my face cold, but inside the plan was clearly formed. Rosa, with her sharp intuition, seemed to sense something was off. She didn't ask, didn't judge, just quietly observed. One afternoon, when Mason went out with the excuse of meeting a client, Rosa knocked on my door. She didn't say a word, just placed a photo on the table. It was a photo taken from a distance, blurry but clear enough for me to recognize. Mason. He was standing on the balcony of a luxury apartment in Brooklyn Heights, his arm around a brunette's waist. His face was beaming, and he was leaning down to gently kiss her forehead. That girl. She wasn't anyone I knew. Not Sarah, not the blonde girl from the bar. But her happy expression was heartbreakingly real. Below the photo was a small caption, written by Rosa. Taken last week. The phone in my hand trembled uncontrollably, feeling like a massive iceberg had just slammed into my chest. My hands were freezing, not from fear, but from the numbing of my heart. My mother's ring was pawned, my savings were gone, and now my life was serving as the backdrop for these elaborate scams. I looked at the photo, at Mason's smile, and at the other girl's happy face. All the promises, the vows, the nights he spent with me flashed through my mind like a tragicomic movie. He didn't just deceive me. He deceived all the women who believed in him, who believed in the dreams he painted. This shock didn't make me cry. It dissolved every remaining emotion, turning them into a terrifying coldness. I folded the photo, my eyes meeting Rosa's bee. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were full of understanding and an unspoken question. Now what? I nodded, a slight but firm nod. Now what? Now it was time to end it. Not with tears or pleas, with destruction. I would turn him into nothing. And this photo would be undeniable proof. That evening, Mason came home late, reeking of booze. He was so drunk he didn't know what hit him, collapsing onto the bed and falling asleep instantly. This was the chance I'd been waiting for. After getting the photo from Rosa, I needed even more concrete evidence, undeniable proof, to give my story absolute weight. I gently got up and walked over to where Mason was sleeping. My heart pounded in my chest, not from fear but from the thrill of the hunter. I knew that once I acted, there would be no turning back. I slowly slipped my hand into his pants pocket, searching for his wallet. Mason was still fast asleep, completely unaware that he was in the hands of his most dangerous enemy. I pulled out his wallet, opened it. Inside, besides a few crumpled dollars and useless credit cards, I found a small envelope. I opened the envelope, and inside was a receipt. It was a deposit for a party. The venue was a fancy restaurant in Brooklyn Heights, and the purpose of the party was clearly stated: engagement party. The names of the bride and groom were printed on the receipt, and the groom's name was Mason Walker. But what stunned me, what froze every cell in my body, was the last line: paid with Visa, my credit card number. The credit card I'd worked dozens of extra hours at the laundromat for. The credit card he'd maxed out to satisfy his sick desires. Now, it was used to pay for his engagement party with another woman. I held the receipt in my hand shaking uncontrollably. A small laugh escaped my throat, a soundless laugh, completely joyless, more like the choked sob of someone about to go insane. Anger, pain, hatred, all intertwined, exploding in my head. He didn't just steal my money. He used my money to buy happiness for someone else. He used my hardship to build a life of lies. I stuffed the receipt into my bag and walked out of the bedroom. My eyes swept across the messy apartment, looking at the wreckage of my life that he had ruined. I wouldn't say a word to him about this receipt. I would let him wake up in his illusion. Because he would never guess that I had everything. Undeniable proof. I wouldn't just expose him. I would turn him into nothing, no honor, no future. His engagement party would turn into a funeral for his own life. And I would be the hostess. After finding the engagement party receipt paid with my card, a strange feeling came over me. No more tears. No more pain. Everything seemed to freeze, and a terrifying coldness enveloped me. I walked out of the bedroom, Mason still drunk and asleep on the bed, completely oblivious to the fate awaiting him. I sat down on the cold sofa, staring into the void. Then a soft laugh escaped my throat. For the first time in months, in years of living in misery, I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a twisted, distorted, cold laugh, like the cackle of someone about to go insane. I laughed with bitterness, with venom, with ultimate liberation. Everything was too clear. He was a monster. And I would not allow that monster to continue existing. That laugh, it wasn't just a release. It was an affirmation. An affirmation that I had completely accepted the brutal truth and I was ready to act. I had passed the limit of suffering, moving into another state. A state of absolute resolve. I was no longer afraid. I was no longer weak. I no longer cared about being a good person. I just wanted justice. A justice I would personally deliver. I stood up, walked to my desk. I opened my laptop, opened email, opened social media sites. All the evidence, from Rosa's photo, the engagement party receipt, the anonymous messages, to the stories of other victims I had gathered. All of it was ready. I had spent all night organizing them, forming a complete, undeniable story. I wouldn't just send it to a small newspaper. I would publish them publicly, on every platform, every forum, everywhere he had ever appeared. I would tag his name, tag his friends, tag the women he had deceived. I would turn his life into a tragicomedy for millions of eyes. He had smirked in my face. Now he would never be able to laugh again. My laugh, the laugh of someone about to go insane, was the laugh that signaled his end. When Mason woke up, he still had his usual groggy, shameless look. He stumbled into the living room intending to turn on the television, but immediately froze. My entire apartment, which was already a mess because of his stuff, had now been cleaned by me. I had gathered all of Mason's belongings, dirty clothes, scattered books and papers, art supplies, unfinished paintings, everything. Not a single thing missing. I didn't throw them in bags or suitcases. I dumped them straight into the building's common hallway, piling them up into a chaotic mess outside the door. He looked at the pile of stuff, then at me, his face shifting from groggy to stunned disbelief. Mason immediately rushed to the door, his hands trembling as he touched his pile of stuff. "Emily, what the hell are you doing?" he screamed, his voice full of panic. "Open the door! You can't do this to me!" He turned to me, his eyes looking at me as if I were a stranger. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I'll explain everything. Please, open the door." He tried to push the door, but I had locked it tightly from the inside. I stood there, not saying a word, watching his face change from stunned to desperate, then to enraged. He started pounding on the door again, screaming my name, a mix of pleas and threats. I remained silent. His apologies, those late pleas, no longer held any weight for me. Empty promises, staged remorseful acts were old news. I had heard them hundreds of times. I just stood there, watching him struggle with the locked door, watching him transform from a manipulator into a pitiful wreck. Just then, I heard a notification sound from my laptop. The first post, with all the evidence, had just gone live. He would never know that as he screamed, "I'm sorry," in the hallway, the entire online world was about to witness his true face. I wouldn't open the door, because the door I had opened for him 3 years ago, the door of trust, was completely shut. And now, the door to hell for him had officially opened. Mason kept frantically pounding on the door, his screams echoing through the hallway. Neighbors started peeking out their doors, curious and annoyed. Just then, Rosa stepped out of her room. She was wearing simple pajamas, but her eyes were sharp and commanding. She didn't say anything to me, just looked directly at the door, where Mason was screaming. I had prepared myself for a solo battle. But Rosa's appearance, her calm demeanor, gave me strength. She was living proof that I wasn't alone. Rosa walked closer to the locked door, blocking it. "Get out," she said, a single word, cold and decisive. Mason's screaming outside suddenly stopped dead. He seemed surprised by Rosa's appearance, a woman he had never taken seriously. After a moment of silence, Mason's voice rang out again. But this time it wasn't a scream. It was a threat, a curse, aimed directly at me. "If you lock that door, Emily," he said, his voice low, full of hatred, "you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Open the damn door." He wasn't talking to Rosa. He was talking to me. He believed he still had power over me, believed his threats could still scare me. But I wasn't scared anymore. His threats, that hateful look, only strengthened my resolve. I looked at the wooden door, at Rosa's silhouette standing guard. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. And then I turned the deadbolt. A decisive click echoed, locking Mason out, locking out a whole painful chapter of my life. I closed the door, closed everything. I had no regrets. My life would not be defined by regret because of him. Stepping out of his shadow, I would rebuild everything. And he would never be able to step through this door again. After I closed the door, Mason's screams gradually faded and then fell silent. He disappeared. 3 weeks. The first 3 weeks of my life without his toxic presence. My apartment, no longer his battlefield, became strangely quiet. I started cleaning, Not just cleaning up what he left behind, but cleaning up memories, pain. I threw away his unfinished paintings, scrubbed the spray paint stains off the floor, and replaced the old beer-smelling bedsheets with fresh, clean ones. Every time I cleaned something, I felt a burden lift. It was my way of healing myself. Rosa was an amazing friend. She didn't judge, didn't ask too many questions, just quietly stayed by my side, listening when I needed and encouraging me every day. She helped me find my balance again, helped me focus on the future. One evening, as I was sitting aimlessly on the sofa, Rosa handed me a newspaper. "You should try applying here," she said, pointing to a small ad. "They're looking for an office assistant at a design studio in Soho. The pay isn't great, but it's a good environment and it's a start." Soho, a vibrant neighborhood, a complete contrast to the gloomy Lower East Side. It was like a faint ray of light, but enough for me to see a new path. I looked at that ad, and my heart actually did a little flutter. Design studio. That was my buried passion. The thing I thought I'd never get back to after Mason cost me my job. But Rosa's offer, it wasn't just some gig. It was my chance to find myself again. I decided to apply. I knew the road ahead was going to be tough as hell, but I wasn't scared anymore. I'd learned my lesson the hard way. I was going to start from scratch, from the very bottom, but this time, I wasn't letting anyone, especially not Mason, control or use me again. I was going to rebuild my life, brick by damn brick, and I was going to show him I ain't trash. I'm Emily Parker, and I'm a whole lot stronger than he ever thought. I actually got the office assistant job at the design studio in Soho. It wasn't no dream job, not the position I used to hold. The pay was garbage, barely enough to cover the absolute minimum. Every morning I had to squeeze onto a packed subway, then hustle all day, doing all the little grunt work like making coffee, filing papers, or running copies. I wasn't drawing anymore, not designing big projects. Everything felt so far removed from what I used to have. But strangely, I felt a sense of peace. Even with the shitty pay, that was money I earned myself, not tainted by any of Mason's lies or manipulations. I only had enough for instant noodles to get by, to pay my share of the rent, and to save every single penny for that damn ticket. But those instant noodles, they tasted like freedom. I didn't have to worry about Mason stealing my wallet anymore, didn't jump every time his phone rang, or get scared when he came home drunk. Every night when I got back to my quiet apartment, I found a small comfort in the simplest things. I'd lost everything, but I'd gotten my own peace back. I knew it was going to take a long, long time to pay off my debts and rebuild my life. But every pack of noodles I ate, every day I worked, was a reminder that I was fighting for myself. I wasn't the weak Emily of before. I was a stronger Emily, tougher and especially more dangerous. Because while I was living a simple life, taking it one step at a time, I was still quietly watching Mason. I kept in touch with Rosa, with the cop friends she introduced me to, and with his other victims. Every bowl of instant noodles was a promise. A promise that I'd never forget what he did. And when the time was right, I wouldn't just be buying instant noodles anymore. I'd be buying Mason a bitter meal, the appetizer to his downfall. He thought he'd turn me into trash. He didn't know I was picking up every single broken piece to forge a sharp weapon. And I was ready, just waiting for him to come back. My life was slowly getting back on track. I got used to the job, got used to the simple rhythm of life in Soho. The cracks on my hands gradually healed, just like the wounds in my heart. I thought I could finally breathe a sigh of relief, that Mason had completely disappeared from my life. He'd been gone for 3 weeks, and I thought I was finally free. But no. Fate, it seemed, just wouldn't leave me alone. One afternoon, when I finished work at the studio, stepped out of the building and melted into the crowded street, I saw him. He was standing there, leaning against the old brick wall across from the building, in that exact charming way that used to reel me in. Mason Walker. He looked rougher, hair messy, but his eyes still had that stubborn, hateful glint. In his hand he held a bouquet of flowers, but not a fresh, vibrant bouquet. It was a crushed, withered bunch of roses, petals falling off, just like our relationship. My heart clenched, a wave of disgust rising in me. He still had the nerve to show up, still had the nerve to wear that pitiful look. I felt like an invisible hand was squeezing my throat. All the pain, the lies, the nights I slaved away to pay off his debts, it all came rushing back. I froze, staring at him. He didn't come closer. He just stood there, looking at me with those eyes that were both stubborn and a little pleading, the same eyes he'd used to manipulate me 100 times. I expected an apology, an explanation, but he said nothing, just a calculated silence, as if he was waiting for my reaction. I had changed. I wasn't the weak, easily fooled Emily anymore. I wasn't scared of him. The crushed bouquet in his hand, it was a symbol of what he'd done to my life. He was back, but not to make amends. He was back to continue his game, and I was going to be the one to end it. This encounter wasn't a surprise. It was what I'd been waiting for, waiting to deliver the final blow. Mason still stood there, with the crushed bouquet, After a prolonged silence, he spoke. Not an apology, not an explanation. He asked with a confident, almost arrogant tone, "Do you still love me?" That question, it was like a ridiculous joke. Love him? After everything he'd done? I looked at him, at that shameless face, the way he still believed he could manipulate me with cheap lies. He actually thought I still loved him. After he'd stolen everything from me, even my mother's ring. I stayed silent, completely silent. I didn't need to answer such a meaningless question. I didn't need to tell him what I thought, what I felt. My silence wasn't hesitation or fear, it was pure contempt. It was an affirmation that he no longer had any value in my life. Mason seemed to misunderstand my silence. He smirked, a self-satisfied smile, the same smile I used to see when he conned other people. "Of course you do," he said, his voice dripping with triumph. "I know you still love me, Emily. No one can ever leave me." He had no idea that my silence was an agreement. It was preparation for the kill shot. He thought he'd won. He thought he still had power over me. That self-satisfaction, that arrogance, that was his fatal weakness. I didn't respond. I just slowly pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had already made arrangements with Rosa, already sent all the evidence to an investigative journalist Rosa knew. He smirked, completely unaware that with every second he stood there, his life was being destroyed by me. He didn't know that the first articles about his scams had already been published. He would never think that I, Emily Parker, who he considered weak, would be the one to end it all. "Of course you do," he said. "Of course I do. Of course he's gonna pay. Everything he's done, it's coming back to haunt him. Right now, after that night he confidently declared I still loved him. I thought he'd give up. But Mason never gave up when he thought he could manipulate someone. He started hounding me. Every day after work, he'd be waiting by the studio entrance. He wasn't bringing crushed flowers anymore. Instead, it was pitiful looks, empty apologies. He tried every way to approach me, to talk, to try and regain control. I ignored him, walked past him like a shadow, but he stubbornly followed. His terrifying persistence, it wasn't love. It was sick obsession. One evening, I was walking really fast, trying to ditch him. But he still followed, his footsteps quickening behind me. We reached a quieter street in Soho. He suddenly cut me off standing right in front of me. "Emily," he said, his voice low, full of fake weariness and pleading. "I know you're still mad, but I'm so tired. I have nowhere to go. Just let me crash for one night. One last night, please. I promise I won't bother you." He tried to reach out and touch me. The same old script, the pathetic look he'd used to fool me 100 times. In that moment, everything I'd endured all this time suddenly exploded. I couldn't hold back anymore. All the pain, the humiliation, the lies, the bleeding cracks on my hands, my mother's ring, the pawn ticket, the engagement party receipt. It all built up and burst out in a scream that ripped through the New York night. "You are trash. You are F-ing trash. Get out! Get out of my life right now!" I screamed, in the middle of that empty street, no longer afraid of curious eyes. I just wanted him gone. I wanted him to understand he had no power over me anymore. I saw Mason's face change, from stunned, then to enraged. He never expected me to react like that. Never expected me to publicly humiliate him on the street. In that moment, I felt an immense release. I was no longer his puppet. I was no longer a victim. I was free. And that scream of "you are trash," wasn't just the end of our relationship. It was a public damnation for Mason Walker and a declaration of freedom for Emily Parker herself. After I screamed at Mason in the street, after his curses and my silence, I thought I was finally at peace. He was gone, and I thought I had won. I went back to my apartment feeling lighter than ever. All evening, I tried to push him out of my mind, focusing on work and talking with Rosa. Everything seemed to be slowly getting back on track. But then, as I was getting ready for bed, an uneasy feeling crept in. A soft click, like something was placed at my door, startled me. I slowly walked to the door, my heart pounding. Under the crack, I saw a small black envelope, no sender's name. A cold feeling ran down my spine. I picked up the envelope, my hands trembling as I tore it open. Inside was a photo. A clear, color photo. It was me. I was standing in my bedroom, my back to the window, my hair still wet from showering, my hand pulling off my t-shirt. My face wasn't clear, but the space, the light, and my figure were unmistakable. The photo, it was taken secretly. From outside. From somewhere I never expected. I dropped the envelope, the photo falling onto the wooden floor. My hands went cold, my body stiff. Someone had taken my photo secretly. Someone had blatantly invaded my privacy. Who? No need to ask. There was only one person obsessed and sick enough to do this. Mason. He didn't just steal my money. He didn't just betray me. He even dared to stalk me. To invade my most private space. And then, I looked closer at the envelope. Inside, under the photo, was a small piece of paper. The trembling, disgustingly familiar handwriting read, "I'm sorry. I miss you." A fake apology, accompanied by a sick act. He didn't just want to manipulate me, he wanted to control me, wanted to prove he could still touch my life, even when he was pushed out. Real fear set in, chilling me to the bone. This wasn't love. This was obsession. I crumpled onto the floor, the disgusting photo lying nearby. Fear consumed me, making it hard to breathe. This wasn't just a financial or emotional battle anymore. This was a direct threat to my safety. My gasping caught Rosa's attention. She opened her door, saw me on the floor, and her eyes immediately darted to the photo. Rosa's face suddenly changed, from her usual calm to extreme anger. Rosa quickly knelt beside me, her eyes sweeping over the photo. The sharp eyes of a final-year law student suddenly reddened with rage. She didn't need me to explain. Just seeing the photo, she understood everything. Rosa squeezed my hand tightly, her voice slightly trembling but full of resolve. "He's playing dirty. Emily. He's going to pay." She looked deep into my eyes, her eyes like a small flame, dispelling some of the darkness in my heart. "Don't be scared. We're not going to let him get away with it." Rosa's "don't be scared," along with her furious gaze, felt like an electric current running through me. I was still afraid, but that fear wasn't alone anymore. I never expected Rosa to react so strongly, as if this was her battle too. Her anger gave me strength, reminding me that I wasn't weak and I wasn't alone. Mason didn't just threaten me. He touched Rosa, touched my safety in my own home. And that was his fatal mistake. I squeezed Rosa's hand tightly. The fear was still there. But now, it was mixed with a new determination. A determination to be protected and to be shared. He had angered the wrong person. Not one, but two. And he was going to pay double. The anger inside me surged violently after seeing that photo. The fear slowly disappeared, replaced by utter contempt. Mason thought he could scare me like that? He thought he could manipulate me with this obsession? No way. I had to do something to regain control, to shake off that feeling of violation. Rosa had taken my hand, her eyes full of understanding. I stood up, walked straight into the kitchen, to the old microwave. I knew I had to do something to destroy that disgusting thing. I picked up the photo. Looking at my blurry face on it, a feeling of disgust welled up. I didn't want to see it for another second. I opened the microwave door, placed the photo in the middle. Then I closed the door and pressed start. The bzzzt of the microwave hummed, and inside the photo began to curl, smoke, then burn. I watched the small flame lick at every edge of the photo, slowly incinerating my image. This wasn't just burning a photo. This was burning away fear. This was burning away Mason's obsession from my life. I wanted to burn him, burn everything he'd done. When the photo had turned into a pile of black ash, I turned off the microwave. The acrid smell of burning paper spread through the kitchen, a reminder of the destruction I had just performed. I was going to burn him out of my life. Not just his image, but every memory, every influence, every bit of power he thought he could hold. This act wasn't just a release. It was a vow that I would not let him harm me again. I would get my revenge. A revenge he would never expect. A revenge that would burn him to the core, just like I had just burned that disgusting photo. The plan was complete, and I was ready for the end. After that night, with the act of burning the photo and the vow in my heart, I felt a lot lighter. I had a rare deep sleep. The next morning, the sunlight poured into the apartment, chasing away the ghosts of the night before. I woke up, made coffee, and got ready for a new workday in Soho. Everything seemed to be slowly getting back on track. I thought I could completely forget about Mason, that he was gone from my life forever. But fate, it seemed, didn't want me to be so peaceful. As I opened the door to leave for work, a horrifying sight hit me, making me freeze. Mason. He was slumped on the ground, right outside my apartment door, his back against the wall. He looked more pathetic than ever, his face pale, hair messy, and eyes bloodshot. But what terrified me the most was his hands. His hands, his wrists, covered in blood. Deep cuts, still oozing, soaking into the faded sleeve of his shirt. A small razor blade lay nearby. He had hurt himself. I froze, not daring to believe what I was seeing. A feeling of disgust, mixed with a little panic and even horror. He had pushed manipulation to a new level, a much more terrifying level. Mason looked up, his eyes meeting mine. Those eyes, they no longer held arrogance or defiance, only emptiness, despair, and a touch of madness. He didn't say anything, but that look, that sight, said it all. He wanted me to feel guilty. He wanted me to open the door, to save him. He wanted to prove he could still control me, even by destroying himself. This was his final psychological attack. I felt a terrible struggle. Part of me wanted to run, wanted to pretend I didn't see anything, but another part, the stronger part, reminded me of everything he had done, about my mother's ring, about the bleeding cracks on my hands, about the secretly taken photo. I took a deep breath. I couldn't let him win this way. I couldn't let him make me responsible for his actions. But what was I supposed to do? Mason still sat there, bloody hands, looking at me. I stood frozen by the door, not knowing what to do. He had pushed everything to the extreme. No more apologies, no more flowery lies. This was raw manipulation, the most vicious psychological attack. He knew my weakness, knew I was a person with a conscience. Then he spoke, his voice weak, raspy, but every word was like a knife cutting into my ears. "If you don't let me in, Emily," he said, his eyes fixed on me, "I'll be out here. I'll be right outside your door. And you'll have to live with that for the rest of your life." He raised his bloody hand, as if to emphasize his threat. He didn't say he'd die because he loved me. He said he'd die because I wouldn't let him in. He wanted to turn me into a killer, the one responsible for his life. He wanted to sow guilt in my mind. This wasn't suicide. This was a game, a terrifying play to control me, to push me to the brink. My heart pounded. Part of me screamed, urged me to open the door, pull him in, save him. But another part, the part hardened by wounds, reminded me of everything he had done. About my mother's ring, about the bleeding cracks on my hands, about the secretly taken photo, about the other girls he had deceived. He didn't deserve to be saved. He was trying to drag me down to hell with him. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. No, I told myself. I won't let him win. I won't let him make me feel guilty. I was on the edge of an abyss. But I wouldn't back down. I wouldn't open the door. Mason still sat there, bloody hands, looking at me with desperate eyes. His threat still echoed in my ears, haunting me. I stood rooted, torn between conscience and reason. I wanted to run, to escape this horrifying sight, but I also couldn't just abandon him. Just then, Rosa stepped out of her room. She had heard everything. Her face was pale, but her eyes were filled with resolve and coldness. Rosa said nothing. She just squeezed my hand tightly. Her hand was cold but powerful. She looked directly at Mason, slumped outside, then turned to me. No long explanation. "Don't open the door," she said, her voice low but firm like a command. "His blood. He spilled it himself. It's not your fault." Rosa pulled me hard into the apartment, slamming the door shut. The thud echoed, silencing all pleas and threats from outside. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath. Mason's pounding on the door grew weaker and then faded out. Rosa stood there, looking at me, her eyes full of understanding and protection. She had saved me from my own weakness, saved me from falling into the guilt trap Mason had set. I didn't open the door. I didn't let him drag me down. But the price of this freedom? It was heavy. Blood, tears, and the most extreme, sickening manipulation. I had told myself he was trash, that he didn't deserve it. But that sight, the way he had hurt himself, still haunted me. I knew what I had to do next. Not for him, but for me. And for my own safety. Mason was still in the hallway, his hands covered in blood. No matter how awful he was, I couldn't let him die right outside my door. That wasn't how I wanted things to end. I didn't want him dead. I just wanted him gone from my life, permanently and irreversibly. I walked to the phone, my hands no longer trembling. This was a purely rational act, not emotional. I called 911. My voice was calm as I gave the address and described Mason's condition. While I was on the phone, Mason outside seemed to have sobered up a bit. He heard me calling, and he understood what I was doing. He started screaming, his words full of anger and disgust. "Emily, you betrayed me. You dare to do this to me? You're a traitor. You'll pay for this." I didn't respond to his accusations. I just stood there, listening. His screams grew more furious, vile curses echoing through the hallway. And then, from a distance, I heard the wail of an ambulance siren. It got closer and louder, tearing through the quiet space. The ambulance siren blared, drowning out all of Mason's curses, all his accusations. That sound, it wasn't just a signal for medical help. It was the sound of freedom. The siren kept blaring until I heard nothing else. Mason was taken away. And my life, finally, was free. He was still screaming, "You betrayed me!" But he didn't know that I was just saving myself. After the ambulance siren faded, I slowly stepped out onto the balcony. It was dark, and the New York wind blew hard, chilling my face. I stood there, leaning on the railing, looking down at the street. The red and blue lights of the ambulance still flickered in the distance, but the space around me had returned to a terrifying silence. After a while, I saw him. Mason was wheeled out of the building on a stretcher, his hands still loosely bandaged. A few paramedics were talking to him, but he just lay there, his eyes empty, staring up at the dark sky. He looked so small, so pathetic. That was the last time I saw him in the flesh. I watched him being pushed into the ambulance, the vehicle speeding off into the night. carrying away a part of my life, a part I wanted to forget forever. The New York wind still blew, chilling, as if wanting to sweep away all remaining traces of the past. No emotion, no tears, just an emptiness and a strange calm. Finally it was all over. I didn't have to kill him. I didn't have to turn myself into someone as cruel as him. I had found a way to make him disappear from my life, legally, in a way no one could blame me. I took a deep breath, embracing the cold wind. Then I turned and walked back into the apartment. I closed the door. A soft click echoed, but it carried the meaning of finality. Closing the door on a painful past. Closing the door on Mason Walker. He would never be able to enter my life again. And I would move on. He would think he had failed. He didn't know that I had won spectacularly. And now, I was ready to rebuild my life. Without his shadow. A new chapter had begun. Without him. A week passed since the night Mason was taken away. My apartment finally returned to its peaceful state. I still went to work in Soho, still ate instant noodles, still chatted with Rosa. Everything seemed to be slowly returning to normal, and I started to feel truly free. I thought I could completely put Mason out of my mind. But then, one afternoon, when I returned home from work, I saw something in front of my apartment door. A package. A cardboard box with no sender listed. I picked up the box, feeling an uneasy sensation. It wasn't too heavy, but there was something strange about it. I opened my apartment door, placed the box on the table. My hands trembled as I tore open the tape. Inside was a carefully wrapped layer of paper. I slowly peeled it back. And then, I froze. It was a painting. An oil painting, meticulously detailed. The painting was of me. I was naked, lying on my old bed, my hair spread out, my eyes looking straight at the painter. I didn't remember Mason ever painting this. Maybe he painted it while I was sleeping, or when I wasn't paying attention. Every detail in the painting was vividly rendered, from the lines of my body to my eyes, all captured in a haunting way. It was a beautiful painting, but it made my skin crawl. If you've listened this far, I sincerely thank you for hearing my story. And don't forget to click the description for the next part.